The things we do, it does mean something to people. It's a time of year where people really try to reach out and help others, isn't it? Creates a little bit of a dilemma for a gospel preacher. Where are you going to preach on at Christmas time, on Sunday? Because we don't really go into setting aside certain days of the year and elevating them above any other day. The first day of the week is enough, and yet everybody's mind is on the holiday and the seasons, and sometimes it's hard to know really the appropriate lesson to bring. But I hope you'll appreciate the lesson this morning. Now, I was at the Webb House last Sunday, and Don Prater was doing the devotional, and he brought up this verse from Zechariah 2 and verse 6. Ho, ho, come forth and flee from the land of the north, saith the Lord. For I have spread you abroad as the four winds of heaven, saith the Lord. Well, that'd be a good Christmas text, wouldn't it? Now, this is not about Santa Claus. In fact, if you put that in context, that ho-ho is not a happy ho-ho. It's more like whoa, whoa in this. But it shows how, I think it illustrates that a lot of people get Christmas stories mixed up with Bible stories. And a lot of time people take Bible stories and they'll turn them into Christmas stories. And they're not, and they have to change them to do it. Somebody asked me, says, what are you going to preach on next Sunday? And I said, and they thought I was joking, I said, I'm going to preach on the three ships that came sailing in on Christmas Day in the morning. You remember that? I haven't heard that carol for a long time, but when I was growing up, there were three ships came sailing in on Christmas Day in the morning. I had no idea what that song was about. Did you know it comes from a Bible story? And the ships are camels. They call the camels the ships of the desert. And the three, well, they're talking about the three wise men that rode the camels across the desert and showed up on the night that Jesus was born. They got it wrong, didn't they? They said Christmas Day in the morning. No, they followed the star. It had to have been at night, wasn't it? But that whole song is all mixed up. What I want to do this morning, let's talk about the true story of the wise men. Not the Christmas story, but the Bible story. The true story of the wise men. And some of this, I think, might surprise you when we get on into this. I'm going to do it like I do on Sunday nights. You know how we on Wednesday nights, you know how we read a scripture and take a test? That's what we're going to do this morning. But you don't have to write your answers down. I just want you to think. I'm going to read the story and then ask some questions and think in your mind. Try to answer that question in your mind before you go and look then at the answer. And I'm telling you, some of these answers might surprise you. Some of them you're going to know, but some of them might surprise you. Let's look at the story. Matthew 2, 1 through 12. Now when Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king, behold, there came wise men from the east to Jerusalem, saying, where is he that is born King of the Jews? For we have seen his star in the east and are come to worship him. When Herod the king had heard these things, he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. And when he gathered all the chief priests and the scribes of the people together, he demanded of them where Christ should be born. And they said unto him, in Bethlehem of Judea, for thus it is written by the prophet, and thou, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, art not the least among the princes of Judah, for out of thee shall come a governor that shall rule my people Israel. Then Herod, when he had privately called the wise men, inquired of them diligently what time the star appeared. And he sent them to Bethlehem, and said, go and search diligently for the young child, and when ye have found him, bring me word again that I may come and worship him also. And when they had heard the king, they departed, and lo, the star which they saw in the east went before them till it came and stood over where the young child was. And when they saw the star, they rejoiced with exceeding joy. And when they were come into the house, they saw the young child with Mary his mother, and fell down and worshipped him. And when they had opened their treasures, they presented unto him gifts, gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And being warned of God in a dream that they should not return to Herod, they departed into their own country another way. Okay, here's some questions. How many wise men? How many wise men? Now, they always talk about three. There's an old tradition. It's older than the three. Augustine and Chrysostom talked about 12 wise men that came. But they didn't get that from Matthew. The answer to how many wise men there is this. There were two or more. It's plural. So there were at least two. And we don't know how many there were. And so the three wise men we always hear about, really it's just the wise men. They probably come up with three. Probably it matches the three gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. But it doesn't tell us how many wise men there were. All right? Next question. Where did they come from? Well, it tells us in the text, there came wise men from the east to Jerusalem. But now the east is a long way around, isn't it? I mean, how far east did they come? Did they come from Edom? Did they come from the Arabian desert? Was it Syria? Syria, even though that's north, is sometimes called east of Jerusalem in the Bible. Babylon, India, China, and all those things have been speculated. We don't really know, but I can tell you what I think. I mean, I guess anybody can tell you what you think, but Roman Empire spread out far, but not too far into the east of Jerusalem. Babylon was kind of getting outside the influence of Rome, and so probably came from outside the realm of where the Roman Empire was. But all we really know is they came from the east. And how far that east was, we just don't know. Next question. Were they kings? You remember the other hymn, or the other carol? We three kings of Orient are. You remember that? All right, this is the answer I think that might surprise you. I'm not going to say they're kings, but did you know in the Old Testament there's prophecies about kings bringing gifts to Jerusalem? Listen, look at this. Psalm 68:29. Because of thy temple at Jerusalem shall kings bring presents unto thee. You got Psalm 72:10 through 15. The kings of Tarshish and of the isles shall bring presents. The kings of Sheba and Seba shall offer gifts. Yea, all kings shall fall down before him. All nations shall serve him. And to him shall be given the gold of Sheba. That's a prophecy. And then this one. Isaiah 60 verses 1 through 6. Arise. Shine, for thy light is come, and the glory of the Lord is risen upon thee. And the Gentiles shall come to thy light, and kings to the brightness of thy rising. Thy son shall come from far. The forces of the Gentiles shall come to thee. The multitude of camels shall cover thee. The dromedaries of Midian and Ephah, they shall come from Seba, shall come. They shall bring gold and incense. They shall show forth the praises of the Lord. That's all in prophecy. Were these coming of these wise men the fulfillment of those old prophecies? Now, Matthew is very quick to point out the fulfillment of prophecies in the book of Matthew. But Matthew never said that this was fulfilling an Old Testament prophecy. So we'd be kind of guessing here at this, wouldn't we? I know that Matthew never says they were kings. Matthew doesn't call them kings. But think back to the Old Testament. You remember Nebuchadnezzar and Belteshazzar and the kings of Babylon and Persia? They had wise men. Daniel was one of those wise men of the kings of the East. And while they may not have been kings, they could have come representing kings. Kings would use wise men for just such a task as that. I don't know that they were kings, but I was reading one story about this, and they said when they showed up in Jerusalem and wanted to see Herod and ask him about the king that was born, this story said Herod spit out his coffee. Well, of course, there's no coffee in the story either. But the thing is, these men were of sufficient importance to get the attention of Herod, and so they weren't just anybody showing up. Herod took them seriously. Let's go to another question. Did they come on camels? That's why we have camels in the Christmas story, isn't it? Did they come riding in on camels? Well, Matthew says nothing about camels. But the same prophecy people point to about kings mention the multitude of camels shall cover thee, and the dromedaries to Midian, and the ephah, they shall come from Seba. That's from the east. From Seba shall they come. Well, we don't know how they came, and we can't really tie this prophecy directly to the coming of the wise men, but they could have come on camels. We just don't know about that, okay? But the camel's very prominent in the Christmas story. They're not even mentioned in Matthew's story. I told you some of these would surprise you, wouldn't I? Let's do another question. How did they know a king was born? How did they know this? Well, yeah, we know what Matthew said. It said, we have seen his star in the east. But how do you connect that star to the birth of a king? How did they know that? I've seen stars. How did they think that star meant there was a birth of a king? Now, that people tried to speculate, well, what could this have been? Maybe these were astrologers, looking up at the sky and studying the skies, and maybe they saw a comet. Maybe that's what it was. Or maybe they saw a convergence of the planets. Three of the planets coming close together that made it look like that was a star that had formed there. Or maybe they saw a supernova. Now that's a star that explodes, and very rarely will something like that happen. I've read all those things, and I'll tell you, they're interesting, but they're not convincing. They're not convincing. Some have said maybe they saw the star in the old prophecies. And there's two prophecies that talk about a star coming. Let's look at them. Look, well, on these astronomical phenomena, I want you to notice this about, I've never seen a star do this. It said, lo, the star which they saw in the east went before them till it came and stood over where the young child was. Now that doesn't sound like any star way up in the sky, does it? It sounds kind of like it's low in the atmosphere. So none of the atmospheric explanations seem to really describe this occurring. But let's look at these prophecies here. Two prophecies. One of them, back to Isaiah 60. Sounds like a star. Arise. Well, the star rises in the east, doesn't it? Arise, shine, for thy light is come, and the glory of the Lord is risen upon thee. And the Gentiles shall come to thy light, and kings to the brightness of thy rising. Is that a prophecy of the star? There's another one. This goes back into the book of Numbers, chapter 24:17. There shall come a star out of Jacob. Okay. This star that comes out of Jacob is not a star you see in the sky. Now this is talking about Jesus as that star. When they sing that song, Beautiful Star of Bethlehem, it's really talking about Jesus is that star that we follow, not something in the sky. Jesus is the real star of Bethlehem. And then these wise men, they may have been wise, but I want you to remember this. These wise men did not know the prophecies. Remember, they had come to Herod asking when the child should be born? And the men that knew the prophecies knew, well, it's in the prophecies. It's going to be in Bethlehem. The wise men didn't know the Old Testament prophecies. These were Gentile wise men. They didn't know the Old Testament. So it's hard to tie this star to those prophecies either. Well, then how did they know? How did they know a star in the sky meant that a king was born? Remember the story? Now, the God told them in a dream to depart another way. God may have told them. Just told them in a dream. You're going to see a star, and that's going to mean a child is born. And when they saw the star, then they knew it. It could have been that way. But Matthew doesn't really explain that part to us. Next question. When did they come? Of course, people say, well, on Christmas Day in the morning. It wouldn't have been a star if it was in the morning, would it? When did they come? And did they come on Christmas at all? And we don't know that Jesus was born on Christmas. I mean, that's just, we got 1 out of 365 chances that that's right, okay, that he was born on Christmas, because we're not told which day. But did they come on the night of his birth? That's how the Christmas story is told. But that's not when they got there. Now, Matthew says this. Now, when Jesus was born, but in the verb here in the Greek language is in the aorist tense. And I know that word may not mean a lot to you, but the aorist tense has no time associated with it unless it's in a particular context. It means past. And the statement could be better translated simply this. Now, Jesus was born. Not when, but just now Jesus was born. Some of your translations, if you have other things beside the King James Version, might say this. It says, now after Jesus was born. It's just simply stating the fact. It doesn't mean all this occurred the day of his birth. But there's something else here. Luke tells us that when 8 days were accomplished, the child was circumcised. Now that's according to the old law. You remember the story. The wise men show up, and God tells them to depart because Herod's after them, depart and go another way. And then Joseph and Mary flee to go into Egypt. Well, it was 8 days at least later, because that's when Jesus was circumcised, on the 8th day. And not only that, you keep reading this, it talks about Mary. The days of her purification according to the law of Moses were accomplished. And she went to the temple in Jerusalem. That's 40 days. We've got at least 40 days after his birth before they flee into Jerusalem. But not only that, look at this. In Luke 2, in verse 12, that the time the angels appeared to the shepherds, this is the night of Jesus' birth. Ye shall find the babe wrapped in swaddling clothes, lying in a manger. A babe. That's an infant. But when Matthew tells the story, he doesn't call Jesus a babe. He says, go search diligently for the young child. That's the word we'd use for toddler. Not an infant, but a toddler. But not only that, look at this. Herod inquired of them diligently what time the star appeared. And to make sure that he put this little young child to death, he had them all slain from 2 years old and under, according to the time which he had diligently inquired of the wise men. When did the wise men come? All we can really say is this. They came within 2 years of the time the child was born. But they didn't come on the night of his birth. Something else about this. Look at this. Where did they find Jesus? Well, you know the Christmas story where they found him? They found him, he's in the manger, you know. I mean, that's the Christmas story. What does Matthew tell us? When they were coming to the house, they saw the young child with Mary, his mother. They didn't just live in the barn after that. I mean, he wasn't in the manger anymore. They'd moved into a house there at Bethlehem. And so they found the young child in a house. Next question. What did they bring? Well, the Christmas story lines right with the Bible story on this one. They presented unto him gifts, gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Now, we don't know this, but it's been said, and it's kind of interesting, I think, here. Gold for a king. Frankincense for a priest. Myrrh for his burial. You remember when Nicodemus and Joseph of Arimathea took the body of Jesus and they treated it with about 100 pounds of aloes and myrrh. Kind of an ominous gift at the gift of a young child, the myrrh. And in my own mind, I sometimes wonder if Mary thought, I'm going to need that myrrh. I'll keep that myrrh. Remember the ladies brought the spices to the tomb on that first day of the week after he had been put to death. Gold, frankincense, and myrrh. I know these gifts arise just in the nick of time because they had to make a journey into Egypt. And the gold would have provided the means for them to pay for that kind of trip that they had to make there. That providential care that took care of that young child during those dangerous days is interesting, isn't it? All right, let's ask another question. Why is this story told? And this may be the most important question that we're going to ask here about this. And you got to remember what Matthew is doing. Why Matthew writes this book anyway. Matthew wants to convince us that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God. This is the gospel of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. That's how Matthew begins. And it's as though the first verse is the proposition. Now let me give you all the proof. Look at his genealogy. Look at the birth and the Isaiah prophecy. And then look at this. Wise men came seeking him from the east. They had seen a star. That doesn't just happen when everyone is born. And God's providential care and protection of the young child and the dreams they received that guided them and the fulfilled prophecy of being born in Bethlehem and making the journey into Egypt and the grief that occurred, the weeping in Ramah and his being raised in Nazareth, all these fulfilled prophecies. Matthew is telling us this story so we would believe that Jesus is the Christ. But there's something else. Matthew's primarily writing to the Jews. And there's an interesting passage that Paul would write in the book of Romans about the Gentiles and the Jews. It's in Romans 11, verses 11 through 14. Salvation is come to the Gentiles. For to provoke them, and that's the Jews, to provoke the Jews to jealousy. Now if the fall of the Jews be the riches of the world, and the diminishing of the Jews the riches of the Gentiles, how much more their fullness? For I speak to you Gentiles, inasmuch I'm an apostle of the Gentiles, I magnify mine office, if by any means I may provoke to emulation them which are of my flesh. If I can provoke the Jews and might save some of them. The Jews largely rejected Christ, and when they would, Paul would turn and preach to the Gentiles. But part of the reason for doing this is to say, look, Jews, look. The Gentiles are coming to worship Him. That should provoke you. Maybe you ought to come too. And so Matthew, writing this story primarily to the Jews, talks about wise men from among the Gentiles. And they came seeking Jesus. That's what Matthew wants the Jews to do. And you know, that's what we ought to do. Think about that. How little those men knew and how great a journey they took and what great gifts they brought. And think of how much we know. Shouldn't we be seeking Him too? And the point is, see, if we were wise, we would seek after Him. So let Matthew work his work in you. And you believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and let those wise men provoke you to seek Him as well. You know, if those wise men were to later hear that gospel, I don't think they'd hesitate. They'd say, oh yes, I'm going to believe and I'm going to repent and I'm going to be baptized because I'm going to seek Jesus. And that's what we need to do. And so with that, if you want to respond to the invitation this morning, you can do it as we stand and sing.